We have this idea in America that America is the land of opportunity, that no matter where you start, no matter how rich or poor your family is, you can achieve anything. We call this the American dream. And we think the engine of that, the thing that makes that possible, is education. If you do well in school, you go to a good college, you get a good job, and you can be anything you want. You can be an astronaut, you can be the president. But we also know that children from high-income families do a lot better in school than children from low-income families. So that calls into question the idea of the American dream. Is it really possible for a child, no matter their background, to do equally well in school and have an equal opportunity to achieve anything in life? So we know income inequality has been growing for the last few decades. The incomes of the rich have gone up a lot, while the incomes of the middle class and the poor haven't changed a whole lot. And so that makes us wonder whether or not educational inequality has been growing at the same time. So if we look, for example, at the test scores of high-income children and low-income children, has the gap between those test scores gotten bigger over time? So I looked at 13 big studies that had been done, the first one in 1960, the most recent one in 2007. There's about 500,000 students overall in all of the studies put together. Big studies like this provide a sample size that makes the findings robust and generalizable to the whole population. Those studies each had information about children's standardized test scores, their academic achievement, and they had information about family income. And because each of the studies was done in a different era, income was measured differently. The way I solved this problem was to compare the test scores of children who were at the 90th percentile of the income distribution among children in their particular cohort to test scores of children who were at the 10th percentile. So when I'm talking about high-income children, I'm talking about children whose families would be making about $165,000 in today's dollars. When I'm talking about middle-income children, I'm talking about children whose families would make about $65,000, and low-income would be families who make about $15,000. So what that means is about 10% of children live in families with incomes above $165,000, and about 10% live in families with incomes below $15,000. Tests are given to students at different ages in some cases, and so we want to line them all up in an axis that we can compare them to each other. So the figure shows, along the bottom axis, it shows the year that children were born. On the vertical axis, we are going to show the size of the test score gap. I converted all the test scales to be comparable to an SAT-like metric so that they would be comparable across time. So the first thing I found was that this achievement gap between high and low income students has grown a lot in the last 3 or 4 decades. So for kids born in the mid-70s, the gap was about 85 points. For kids born in the 2000s, the gap was about 125 points. That's an increase of over 40% in that time period. Most of us would be very happy to raise our test scores by 50 points, much less 125 points. So these are very big differences. But then I was interested in, has it grown more between poor students and middle-class students, or has it grown between middle-class students and students from high-income families? The interesting thing is that the test score gap between middle-class and low-income students hasn't changed much at all over the last 50 years. But if you look at the gap between the high-income and the middle-class students, that gap was only about 25 points back in 1960 or so. And now that gap's about 70 points. And so it's almost tripled over the same time period. So this means that poor children lag about 3 to 4 grades behind their high-income peers in school, and middle-class children lag about 2 grades behind their high-income peers in school. Just like most of the economic gains in the last few decades have accrued to the rich, most of the educational gains in the last few decades have accrued to the children of the rich. One of the other questions I was interested in is this widening achievement gap happening while children are in school? The striking thing is that the gap between high and low income children is very big when kids enter kindergarten and doesn't get much bigger as they progress through school. And most of where the gap is coming from is happening before kids even get to the kindergarten door. So it may not be that we have more inequality in schools than we used to. It suggests that we have more inequality in early childhood than we used to. Education has gotten even more important in the last few decades in terms of economic success. So the value of a college degree, for example, in the labor market in terms of how much you can earn is much more than it was in the 50s and 60s. And so at the same time that education's gotten even more important, the educational disparities between high and low income students have gotten even wider. So my worry is this creates a kind of downward spiral where the children of the rich do better in school and therefore have more opportunities later in life, and the children of the middle class and the poor have fewer and fewer opportunities. We ought to be making sure that both poor and middle class students have access to high quality childcare and high quality preschool. So if we can get children to school on a level playing field without these large achievement gaps, then schools won't have to focus so much of their attention on remedying the gaps and can spend more of their energy on developing the kind of skills we want children to have: complex thinking skills, problem-solving skills, collaboration skills, the kind of things that are essential to a growing economy and a lively democracy.